Scott, I'll read some of the questions and then we can bounce off back and forth answering them.
Yeah, perfect.
All right.
Yeah, and also just before you, sorry, both kick off, wanted to just welcome some of the new members that joined this week. So I see that Iris, Jennifer, Andre, I'm sure we'll have more join us, but I will stay on at the end if there's any questions about the app in terms of making sure you get set up or you have any questions about the program. But feel free to ask any nutrition related questions, you know, to Scott and Elizabeth. This is special that we have them both on at the same time. Usually it's either one or the other. So this is sort of a bonus open Q&A for everyone.
All right, let's kick it off. Matt has a couple questions that he submitted. So we're going to go through submitted questions and then make sure that for you guys that are on, there's time at the end for you to ask your questions as well, or put them in the chat and I'll be sure to grab them. Number one, does carb intake change based on weather, cool versus hot conditions, or would that only apply to liquid intake?
Do you want to answer? Do you want to start with that? Sorry, there seems to be a lot of noise. I don't know what's going on next door to me.
Sure, I'll go. So most definitely hydration intake changes based on weather. Obviously, sodium needs change. In cooler air, actually, a lot of times our natural instinct is to drink less, which is not which can get us into trouble. So at least maintaining hydration and not always hydrating to thirst, staying on a kind of schedule that you've had and established is very important. As far as carb intake, I would say it doesn't, unless it was a dramatic change in weather, cold versus hot. I don't know that there would be that big of a difference. I think your appetite might change cold versus hot. So potentially what carbs you were consuming. But if we have a goal and the intensity is the same either way, carb intake is pretty standard.
I'll unmute myself. So one of the things, so in cold weather, as Elizabeth pointed out, your probably consumption, and this is the reason, one of the reasons why carbohydrate liquids aren't always the best choice, especially in cooler weather, is because your sweat rate is going to drop. So your total fluid intake is potentially going to drop depending on what your sweat rate is in that temperature. And if your primary source of carbohydrates is in liquid, yet your consumption of liquid is going down, you start to see where the issues can present themselves in cooler weather, which is why you probably want to consider using certainly more solids in cooler weather, because you're probably going to cope better with them, but also manage to get that total carbohydrate amount in if your fluid intake is dropping as a result of the cooler weather. But then on the flip side, in the hotter weather, we know that increased internal core temperature as a result of external environmental temperature can affect gastric emptying of the gut. So again, you're to what Elizabeth was saying is your total intake shouldn't be dropping, but you might find as a result of that external increased temperature that the ability to consume carbohydrates drops. And so what you just need to do is manage that as best possible during the race. But hopefully what you've done in training is actually mimic those race conditions so that you can improve gastric emptying from the gut into the small intestine under heat duress, and then actually get used to consuming the amount of carbohydrates in that increased sort of temperature. Does that, that's from Matt, is it?
Yeah. And
Matt,
then,
does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
A lot of it's just practice in whatever temperature you're in, like, and this comes back to, I guess, data points. So, yeah, I was just chatting to Elliot before. I mean, and I do mention this in the podcast. I think he's got like 120 data points in terms of sweat tests and carb data. I mean, like literally because he lives in a pretty temperate environment, you know, we had to work out what his sweat rate was, and he's an extreme sweater. Sorry, Elliot, if I'm just going to talk about you, but, his sweat rate is extremely high. And we started to see that after repetitive testing. And it was like, okay, we know you're sweating. What is your sweat rate, Elliot? It's about 1.4 liters, 1.5 liters an hour, isn't it? In over 80.
Yeah, it's something like that. It's not the highest, but
it's significant. And what we were seeing early on with Elliot was like, he had times where he was losing 4% body weight in quite short duration sessions. And again, this is one of those ones where he wasn't necessarily weighing himself before and after, say, hour-long sessions or 70-minute sessions, because he was like, it's only 60 minutes. But then he started doing that and then started seeing that, oh shit, I'm losing 3% body weight in an hour. And that can have significant repercussions on recovery for the next day when he might have a session where he thinks he's got to weigh for. So I think, you may do an hour session in over 85 and think, it's fine, I don't need to worry about this. But because your fluid loss is so high, or your sweat rate is so high, your body weight percentage is lost is significant. If you don't then rehydrate post that 60-minute session to get yourself back up to an ISO hydrated state, then the next session, the next day, could become problematic. And then you're going into this sort of downward spiral of chronically being potentially underhydrated, not necessarily dehydrated, but just certainly underhydrated, and not, that could have repercussions on tendons. It could have, potential for injury to joints. We don't necessarily understand, the role of hydration in terms of tendons and joints and muscles. But when you think muscle is 70% water, that tendons contain a lot of fluid, joint fluid, so on, it sort of makes sense to be as hydrated as possible, not necessarily overhydrating, but certainly getting back to what your standard body weight is before a session. So I think the more that everyone can get on point with understanding their sweat rates in temperatures less than 85 and over 85, I think the better off you're going to be, which will then impact, obviously, your ability to understand what carbohydrates you're going to need and how much carbohydrates you're going to need, if it is going to be in liquid or solid form when you're on the bike, and how to manage that as well.
I think that leads well into Matt's next question about, is fueling the same whether biking or running indoors or outdoors? And I think that's a temperature, not specific.
So I think from a temperature standpoint, Matt, I think this is where, and again, I bang on about this all the time, it's probably a bit boring, but whatever your race is going to be, is try and mimic that. There's no point going to Texas and racing in 90 Fahrenheit and then constantly doing all your training on Swift at, a very comfortable 65, 70 or whatever. Oh, that's probably too cool. 70, 75. And so it's mimicking what you're going to come up against in the race. And I remember, I couldn't remember the athlete, but Helen Jackson is one who seems to do a lot of heat acclimation training on her bike in her basement in preparation for hot races. And she tends to document that quite well on social media. And I just think it's a really good insight into, what is required, and being comfortable, being uncomfortable in your basement, I think is a really good, thought process. And don't just treat every, session as one where you've got your fans blowing and you've got everything sort of, very comfortable.
And I think for those that maybe don't have a setup, if you have a gym, you can wear layers, or even wear layers outside. And, be mindful, trying to encourage heat stroke, but there's other ways if you don't have a setup where you can practice that, where you can still get that heat training. Not doing, if possible, not doing your training at 5 a.m, doing it at your lunch hour if temperature increases, stuff like that, practically to get that done.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point as well, Elizabeth, is like, think about when you're going to be racing and try and mimic some of your training at that time. Like if your run is going to be at 11 o'clock in the morning, because that's when you sort of finish, well, it probably wouldn't even be then, would it? When's the typical run? I guess it depends on the start, but you know, if you think, okay, the swim 70.3, swim, let's say 30 minutes for a swim, average out 4.5, 5 hours for the bike. Let's say you start at 7, your run is generally going to be what, 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Is that right? For most people, like do some sessions at 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon and get used to running at that time, as opposed to running every morning at, you know, 6:30 in the morning. And I know it's a practical element of it based on work and depending on your work and whether you work from home or whether you're in the office, but maybe taking an hour off at lunchtime and doing a run then could be really beneficial, just to get used to, you know, again, eating at that time before that session, getting used to having food inside you at that time of the day, at that temperature, at that pace. It you know, from a practical standpoint, it makes complete sense.
Yeah, I second that, absolutely. All right, we have a question about the new Maurten Bars. So Pam submitted one. What do we think of their new solid bar? I will break this down. So the feedback, we'll start with taste. I've heard it is a dense, very dense, thick bar, but tastes absolutely delicious. That's from a couple cyclists and triathletes that I spoke to over the weekend. The nutrition profile breakdown, 225 calories, 41 grams of carbs, you know, 4 fat, 3 protein. Ingredients, gluten-free oats, fructose, glucose syrup, just got boldly pointed out, high fructose corn syrup, maltodextrin. You know, it's a basic oat bar per se. I think cost comes in about $3, we decided. So along the same lines as any of the other bars. Slightly more dense carb wise, so you could break it up into potentially 3, like over the course of an hour, you know, 3 feedings if it felt like too much, but something to practice with, something to add to the arsenal. It looks good. It tastes good and works. I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't see anything particularly special about it either.
Yeah, I think it's a, yeah, Maurten even makes a big point of saying this, that it's not a hydrogel. It's got nothing special in it. It's effectively oats with some cocoa and some glucose fructose syrup. So I think, yeah, 46 grams of carbs. It's certainly not a low carb bar. You'd probably, yeah, split it into 2. You could treat it as 2 gels, I guess, if you, along that line of thinking. You get 12 calories per half bar, which is a little bit better than a gel, I guess. So it would be one of those ones where if you're using a bar, you could certainly try it. $3, $1.50 a serve if you split it into 2. It's not too bad. It's about the same price as a Cliff bar, a little bit smaller than a Cliff bar. It is 60 grams total size. So I'd be interested to know, like, just how long it is in terms of whether it can fit easily into a bento box or your back pocket. But yeah, I think it's just another bar. So give it a go, see if the taste is nice, see if you can manage it. I think it's going to come down to how chewy it is and how easy it is to swallow. But yeah, nothing magic about it. And to be honest, I don't think there's too many magical qualities to any products. So
no, not really.
Taste and palatability, and probably a few of the ingredients. There doesn't appear to be anything in it that's, you know, going to upset you. It's a shame. I never understand why they don't use olive oil as opposed to, say, a vegetable oil. I guess it just comes down to cost.
I think it's taste.
Maybe taste
would change the flavor, right? When you're cooking, they're always like, don't choose, you know, olive oil. It changes the flavor because it overpowers or whatever. But it would be
okay.
It'd be a better.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they didn't use like a vegetable oil in there.
Yeah.
But, you know, I guess it comes down to cost as well as taste and that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, another one from Matt. My long brick on Saturday calls for 1 almond butter pouch or 1 bar every 40 to 60 minutes on the bike and run, which seems way short of the 100 to 120 grams per hour you typically recommend.
So, and Matt, I think I covered this with you. So it really comes down to the intensity of the session. So if we're pushing race pace, then yes, we want to be going higher carbohydrate fueling. So for a male, getting into that 100, 120 grams an hour on the bike, and with the runoff, depending on what you've got, you know, you're probably pushing somewhere between 60 and potentially up to 90 grams an hour. If it is Z1, Z2, and I know depending on the coach, if the coach is putting in Z1, Z2, but they're telling you that that's at race pace, then that's where maybe the confusion is coming. So any sessions that you are doing at race pace, then we want to be fueling that appropriately with higher carbohydrates amounts. If it is a recovery session, if it's a fat max session, whatever the coach is terming it, then that is going to be your lower carbohydrate fueling, so around 30 grams an hour, with the rest of the calories being made up from protein and fat, so mixed sources of calories, using a bar, almond pouch, trail mix, so on, rice bars, if you want to make those sorts of things. That's where that would be coming in.
And in the app, that's where you'll see that session is either red, amber, or green. We adjust for those. Like if we see that it's a race pace or zone 3, 4, if it's marked correctly, the fueling will be different. The color will be different as well for that session.
Does that make sense, Maddie?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, because just like on those lower intensity sessions, it's not that, you know, I mean, some people will choose to just do them probably a little bit under fueled, i.e. with a little bit less calories per hour. So some people might do it with 200 calories an hour. Some may do it with 3, some may do it with 4, but you're just making up the rest of the energy through choice of, you know, some extra fat or some extra protein in conjunction with that lower carb amount.
Okay.
So just always think race pace, you know, we're thinking in our heads, you're definitely working over 65, 70% of your max capacity. So therefore carbohydrates are going to become your primary fuel source. Therefore, that is where you want to practice using higher amounts of carbohydrate and practice fueling with those.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool.
All right, another one from Pam. In a race, when on the bike, is food consumption steady throughout the ride, or is there a trend up or down as the hours pass? Same question on fluids. I try to stop my consumption of solids at a certain point prior to the run so I won't have digestive issues while running.
Yeah, I'd probably go in reverse, Pam. I'd probably recommend that you use, if you are using carbohydrate liquids, I'd tend to recommend using them at the start of the bike and getting through those in the first sort of half of the race, and then moving into solids. Now, your definition of solids may be a little bit different. When I'm talking solids, or when we're talking solids, we're probably talking more around gels and blocks. Certainly with a bar, if you are using a bar, I would, definitely stop that probably, around 60 minutes at least before you go into the run. But you could have a gel. The timing of carbohydrates is going to be consistent all the way through so that you're hitting your grams per hour target. Coming off the bike into T2, again, depending on when you are considering having your first feed in the run, if that's 10 to 15 minutes into the run, depending on how long T2 is going to take, then you may want to consider having your last gel on the bike, perhaps 10 minutes before the end of the bike. And just feeling comfortable knowing that you've got some carbohydrates on board and you can probably allow another 20 to 30 minutes before your next feed, just to sort of come out of that transition from the bike, get comfortable once you move into the run and just settle into your race pace on the run.
So this isn't an official question, but I've had athletes ask it before. If they get to the end of their bike and they're feeling full, like they don't want to consume more, how long could they go without to try to let their stomach settle? Is there a strategy if they're just done eating, which hopefully they practiced this before and they know how their body handles it. But if they haven't, how much time, what should they do?
Pam, can you turn your camera on? I don't think I've actually ever met you. Is that possible? Or are you at work?
she on?
Oh, there she is. You're on mute, Pam. You're just on mute.
Yeah,
Hi, Pam.
I'm working, but working from home, so.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, does that, and is that, does that make sense in terms of, is that what you're talking about, solids? Are you talking about bars at the
Yeah,
end?
I was, because, and I'm actually kind of changing how I eat on the bike, because I'm trying some of the things that I'm learning here on what makes me feel good. You know, what I've tended to have like some homemade rice bars in the past, and those felt, you know, really great. But I would really have to watch, because I was a runner for years before doing triathlon. So I know, you know, there needs to definitely be a gap before eating solid food. And when I say solid, I mean solid as opposed to gels or blocks.
Yeah.
But I would really have to cut it off so that I would not have issues when I got off the bike. So I've done pretty well with knowing the timing, but now I'm trying to try some new things that are even easier on the stomach but still give me all the energy. And I kind of like what I'm trying, because I haven't had long to experiment, so to speak. A longer ride last Friday, but I tried new fluid, the pH that I got. Yep. I just got a couple tubes, just tried out. And then
you consumed gels, didn't you? You were using pH as your electrolyte and your fluids, but you were switching into gels. Is that correct?
On Friday I had that, and then I had the endurance tap stroop waffles. So I did have a run off the bike. So I did the stroop waffles, and then I think I had a gel. It was either Maurten or endurance tap gel. And thank you for the answer on the bars too. I will not waste my money. So that was good. Yeah. So, but yeah, definitely if I'm going to run off the bike, I try to really watch so that any solids going into my stomach. And that's just how I've been. But I felt really great on the bike. If I didn't have an appointment and a run to get in, I could have kept on riding with I did not feel, I felt full of energy. I felt great. Love the pH so far. I mean, it's just, it's like, I thought I would miss maybe some of the sweeter, like from Tailwind, which is great, like, and I'm not trying to knock other, but I was surprised at how much I liked trying the fluid that did not have all that sugar in it.
Yeah, and I think it's, I know like there is always that fear factor of transitioning into something different, but I guess in your case, like what you're trying to do is manage your fluids and your electrolytes appropriately, but then manage your total carbohydrate intake, and doing that through a slightly different system, i.e. using gels, blocks, stroop waffle and whatnot. And then, just so everyone else understands, is like, there is going to be that individual variability between what someone tolerates very well and someone doesn't tolerate very well. Again, if we use someone like Elliot, and I can use Danielle as well. Danny, same thing, like what she tolerates in terms of carb consumption, she's worked her way up to 90 grams an hour, 90 to 100 grams an hour, but it's, a combination of endurance tap, her using endurance tap and pH, the pH gels is what she has found to be very useful for her, and then managing her fluid consumption, again, using not necessarily a carbohydrate liquid, but just feeling comfortable with that balance. And it just comes down to practice and working out what you feel comfortable with. We can't give you a formula for that. We can give you formula in terms of these are the targets in grams per hour that you're trying to hit, and these are the products we're recommending. But then ultimately it comes down to, what do you find palatable? What do you feel comfortable with consuming multiple times over an extended duration? And that only can come from you as the athlete. And talking, to Elizabeth and myself about, are these products, we will recommend certain products, but I know certain products always are being brought to our attention, saying, what do you think of this one? A bit like the Maurten Bar. And, as long as you're checking and making sure that the products you're taking are actually pretty good for you, in terms of as good as a high glucose or high fructose processed product can be for you, there is a purpose for that. I guess, you know, you're not eating them every day. And that probably comes back to Matt's question. You know, if it's a Z1, Z2 session, you probably don't need all that refined carbohydrates at that point in time. Like, this is an opportunity, Matty, you know, take some sandwiches out there, like some, you know, some whole wheat bread with some peanut butter and jelly in it. If you want, wrap them in some foil. If you want to make homemade rice bars, if you want to take a banana with you, you know, you can do that stuff. It just comes down to the practicality of it and whether you can be bothered, you know, but maybe that's an opportunity to eat some healthy food on a ride, if you want to call it that, you know.
You know, and one of the things I learned, because I just got addicted, really, it seemed, you know, using these rice cake things that I'd make at home, and I'm vegan, so it'd be the peanut butter, the jelly, so I get some of the sugar, I get the peanut butter, I like that flavor, and then the easily, to me at least, digestible rice. But I mean, it's a challenge. Like, I would travel for, you know, half Ironman and then Ironmans. I've never done, I'm in the United States, but I've never done an Ironman here, and I'm still not. And so traveling with my little pan and my stuff, you know, just trying to get the stuff. I mean, it's just another thing. So it's like, what's more practical, plus having to wrap them, you know, when I'm on the bike, and it's just comes into. So I'm 3 months out from an Ironman. So I figured, you know, it's a great time for me just to be trying this stuff out, you know, not 3 weeks before, but 3 months, because I can try different combinations. And, you know, as the rides get longer, and I've been there before, you know, it's not uncharted, you know, territory, but, you know, because the way I feel after 3 hours on the bike versus, you know, 5 or 6 hours is different. And I know that. So, you know, it's just going to see as it builds up again, where, how that goes. But right now I'm optimistic, you know, I mean, it's really good to try with, especially the science behind it.
Yeah. And I think, look, on that point of, and this is probably why I tend to not recommend homemade products for races, is because it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to go and cook before a race, like, good on you. It's not, I know, look, Sarah used to do it. She used to take stuff and take a rice cooker and all that to races away. But like, you know, it's full on. And, you know, if you saw her luggage, it was crazy. And most people don't have the luxury of getting all that stuff paid for and whatnot. So yeah, if you are going to take the rice bars, you know, pre-make them, take enough to last you the entire duration you're out there, plus the race. Make sure you're packing enough. But I think to that point, like that's why I would just choose the pre-packaged, pre-made products that you're going to use in a race and practice using those in those race pace sessions, as opposed to just creating another element of difficulty for yourself. I mean, like, you know, Elliot did Ultraman Arizona, and there was no way, like we were talking about, you know, he had the option to have some, you know, wraps or tortilla wraps or sandwiches and things like that. But in the end, he just went with processed things that he could just readily get hold of and take with him. And I think it's just sensible from that. You just don't want to have another headache of thinking about, oh, how do I make this, or how do I get these ingredients?
And you did remind me that I think I have a little mini rice cooker somewhere in a drawer that I need to get rid of. I forgot that. But the rice bar, I did like the taste, and I just figured, since I still have some of that special wrap, you know, the foil parchment type wrap and all that, I can always make them for home. Like, you know, there's workouts I do just, you know, before going to the pool or something early in the morning, or before I go, that aren't as practical, but, you know, they're still good. So but I like it. I mean, it's just a whole reset, and, you know, it's just why I'm here. So
Elliot, do you want to say something?
So I just want to say the other thing that's good about the practice, not just to make sure your stomach can handle it, is really the practicality. So on Ultraman, I was able to do a little bit of PB&J, but on that race, I've got my own crew, and I'm literally stopping, right? I'm not carrying it in my pocket and trying to get it out of a bag and all that. And I will say, you know, PH just came out with Precision Hydration just came out with their shoes, which I tried. They were really the bike, and you're trying opposed to stopping. They're really hard to get out of the package, opposed to like the Cliff Blocks, which I used to have, and they slide right out. But the PH gels are really sticky and they've got like a little cardboard thing in them. And I tried riding with the guys on it, and it's just, you're fumbling while you're trying to maintain speed. So that's a good thing to practice. That's for me usually the biggest thing for races is what can I just grab, get down fast, and not screw up the pace I'm riding at. So
yeah, I had the same experience with those pH tubes. Actually, I was trying to run and unzip them and do that. And I think like I spoke to some people, some athletes the other day about what they actually. I mean, I recommend generally cutting the Cliff Block packets in half, but quite a few athletes just don't even have them in packets in their bento box. They just actually have them all separate as the chews. But I'm like, surely that gets pretty messy and disgusting. So
yes.
yeah, it's up to you what your preference is. I think if you keep them in just cut the packets in half, they slide out pretty well from the.
Right. No, I have found the Cliff Blocks work great. Yeah, I cut them in half, so it's 3 in a thing, and they slide out. The pH blocks
Just
really,
stays.
they're sticky. They're
Yeah,
really sticky on the outside.
The consistency of the chews it's nearly like those old school chemist glucose blocks that they give diabetics. It's that sort of consistency. So it's worth trying them. Yeah, like the mint one's really interesting. Like it tastes like you're sort of getting toothpaste, sort of a shot of toothpaste at the time you have the mint one, which is interesting when you're running. But you know, worth trying. I mean, again, it's what is it, 20, 25, 26 grams? Oh no, they're 30 grams. 30 grams. The nice thing about the pH chews is per block is 30 grams, which is actually very manageable in terms of the size. So, but again, whilst they deliver 30 grams, they also deliver a bit of a pain in the ass in terms of trying to get them in. So it is, again, it's a little bit of practice, work out which ones you like. Personally, I think the Cliff Blocks are great. It is probably the block that I would most recommend based on feedback from athletes over the past 5 years, just saying they just work, they're good. I don't necessarily like the rest of Cliff's products, but I think, you know, again, their bars, we've talked about the Maurten Bar, talked about the Cliff, like the Cliff Bar, it's very big, but it delivers a lot of calories. If you cut that up into thirds or halves, you know, Pat Romano won't mind me saying he uses I think it's the Caffeinator Cliff Bar, and he loves it. It just delivers a heap of calories, a heap of carbohydrates, a bit of protein, a decent amount of fat. And I think you're getting, I can't remember exactly what it is, like 400 calories or something like that in a full bar. So half a bar delivers 200 calories, which, yeah, it was a lot, you know, for only half a bar. So it is something to consider using. Do I like the product in terms of the ingredients that they use now? I know they're using soy protein, they're putting all sorts of things in their bars now, which I don't necessarily like from an ingredient standpoint. But if it works for you and you don't get any GI complaints and you're managing to get half a bar in and 200 odd calories per feed, and you're doing an Ironman, it's probably worth considering, because it's just at some point it becomes calories in, just trying to get calories in the Ironman to maintain some sort of balance, which you're never going to do. You're always going to be in a caloric deficit. So it is just something to consider.
All right, so that was it for submitted questions. So let's open it up. Anyone on, you can unmute, raise your hand, write it in the chat. Anything?
Can I ask for everyone to put their cameras on? I haven't actually met Jennifer or Andre or Iris or Maynor. That'd be great. Thanks, Danny.
Ooh, Danny's out for a walk or something. It's pretty.
And Iris is running.
Here we go.
Fair enough. And Jennifer, and you look like you're running as well.
Yeah, about to be running, but appreciate you guys hosting this and letting me hop on audio only. And shout out to Kathleen for the recommendation, and for Elizabeth for doing our Fuelin session with the Betties. Really informative, and the girls just loved it.
Oh, that's cool.
Thanks.
Same. Everything that she said. Thank you, Kathleen. Another Betty squad member.
Very good. How far are you running, Jennifer?
I've got 55 minutes this session, so not too bad.
I thought you were saying 55 miles. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that sounds exciting.
Super exciting. No, it's shorter today.
That's good. And you're obviously all new to it. Does everything make sense at this point in time? I know there's a lot to take on, and you know, what we always say is if it was super easy, everyone would be nailing it. So is there anything at the start that you're unsure about that you sort of want clarification over?
I think so far, like I'm just working through the emails and stuff that have been kind of trickling in. And so once I get through those, I got through the intro video, but I'm hoping like once I start putting into practice, it'll make more sense. I'm coming off of a nutrition program that was like super structured down to like, you will eat this many grains of rice kind of thing. So I'm looking forward to the challenge of the flexibility to eat different food groups.
Yeah, I guess that's why we created what we created, so there wasn't that rigidity in it, and you actually understand that there's many ways to skin a cat, and you know, you can eat all sorts of foods to still deliver the same sort of macronutrients and energy requirements. As long as you start to understand when to use different types of foods, then you can be fairly flexible in that process. So again, like what I do say is just take your time with it, try and read, look in the learn section, watch as many of the videos, watch the Q&A sessions that we do, and join these, and reach out with questions if you've got them. And it hopefully will make sense as you go through. Generally does for 90% of the people coming through the program. So yeah, just keep learning, I guess.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Cool. Enjoy your run.
Run.
Thank you.
And Maynor, how are
Hey,
you doing?
how you doing?
Good.
Good. Finally, I fixed my camera.
Where are you based?
DC, Washington, DC.
Yep. Okay. And how are you finding it?
Good. I like it. It's good.
Good.
Hot
Good.
right now. It's like 90 degrees.
Oh, that's good. Are you? What are you training for?
I have a race coming up on Sunday.
Ah, which race is that? I should know that.
Ironman, Virginia, Roanoke, Virginia.
Virginia Blue Ridge?
Yes.
Yeah. You're competing out there with a few athletes, actually. Elizabeth's, oh no, she's not on this call. Elizabeth, another lady is out there doing it this weekend as well, which is good.
No, that's nice. And the following week, I have like a Ironman Des Moines.
Yep. That's that will probably be a hot one, I imagine.
Yes, that one too. Yeah.
That should be good. Excellent. And are you comfortable with your race nutrition? You feel good?
Oh yeah.
This one?
Oh yeah, very very comfortable. Yes, everything I dialed it in. Everything.
Very good. Very good.
Yes.
And did you have any questions for today? Do you have anything in particular you wanted covered?
No, I don't have any questions. Oh yes, I got one. How about after the races is over, what should we keep in the plan, or should we put it on hold, or what? I never have a plan like this, so I don't know what I should do.
Do you mean directly after the race? What should you do? Or do you mean like weeks after the race?
Yeah, a week after the race, should I continue the plan, or should I stop the plan? Or like I said, I don't know. I never like have a plan like that before. I never follow a plan like this, so I don't know.
Are you continuing training of any sort? Or do you stop all training?
Maybe I'm gonna take a month, and then I'm gonna keep training.
Yeah, look, depending on, it's obviously individual. If you're going to stop Ironman training, but not necessarily stop all training and maybe revert to sort of more time in the gym or doing some other type of cross training, then certainly the program will just amend itself to whatever training you're doing. And so depending on what your goals are, if that's, looking more at body composition or improving strength gains and things like that, then nutrition is obviously going to play an important role in that as well. So it's not like, I guess the simplest way of thinking about it is it's not like just when you stop doing racing, you don't need nutrition anymore. I mean, the one thing about nutrition is you're going to have to do it every day, regardless if it's structured or not. So I guess we hopefully make it a little bit easier to follow and understand what you require, but ultimately it comes down to what your choice is.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, I think I'm gonna keep it.
Yeah, I mean, you can
Yeah.
you can just put in if it's gym, run, swim, bike, whatever your sessions are, you can just put those in your Training Peaks plan, and we'll just amend the program according to what your program is.
Okay, perfect, no problem. Yeah, okay,
Sure.
I'm gonna keep it
Sure.
because definitely I find it really nice. It worked really well for me. I really
Good.
lose weight really fast. It feels great. Yeah,
Perfect. That's good.
great. Yeah, that's all.
And
That's all.
thanks, man. Good luck this weekend.
Thank you.
And Iris, you're new.
I finished running just in time.
Very
I
good.
am.
And how
Well,
you're from Betty, is it? From
I am. I listened to Elizabeth, and she was so informative and made sense. I said, I gotta join.
very good.
So I have a half next weekend. It's at the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and it's a good race. It's a good prep for Ironman Lake Placid because it's all hilly. And then in 8 weeks, Lake Placid.
And when you say you have a half marathon or a half Ironman?
Half Ironman.
Okay, where is that at? I can't see it on the plan.
At the Poconos, PA. So it's not an Ironman race. It's a kinetic sport organizes that, but it's a good prep for Lake Placid because it's all hills.
Yep.
So that's what's on my plan.
Okay.
So I'm not going to obviously make changes right now, prior to the race. I will try and practice a little bit here and there. I guess the question I have, starting to think about transitioning, I find that solids fill me up, so then I don't want to drink. And so what's a good way to start easing into this so I'm not dropping the hydration in favor of solids?
Do you want to answer that, Elizabeth?
Sure. So I know personally, I will do solids at smaller, shorter intervals, smaller bites. So instead of eating 20 or 30 minutes, I'll do like 15 and have like a bite and a couple sips. So I take it in less more frequently, and that tends to help my stomach a good bit. Or alternating solid, liquid, are two strategies that I've found that work.
Okay.
I think, look, I mean, when you say solids as well, Iris, what solids are you saying? Are you saying gels or are you saying bars?
Bars or even banana. If I'll take one banana on my ride, it will fill me up. I don't feel like I want to drink. And then this is a mistake I just did this week, and I had 5.5 hours. And I said, oh, I'm feeling full. I don't need more energy. And once you are off the plan, you are off the plan. You can't catch up. And I wasn't able to catch up on calories anymore. So I think bars and I'm okay with gels actually because I shove them down with the hydration. Yep. It's the food that actually fills me up so much that there's no more room for liquids. And I guess what Kathleen told me is you really train the belly. Yeah. So I guess that's what I need to remember. That right now I can't, but I need to train it.
Yeah. And there's, like the Q&A I did last week, I think it was about training the gut. There's a lot of different elements to training the gut. There's the pre-feeding. So eating a meal close to a training session has positive effects on training the gut, and that perception of how full you are. The more you do that, the better perception is of being able to consume more food or fluids with a full stomach and still perform at a high rate. There's the in-session training of the gut, which is, again, and this comes back to Matt's question, you're not going to be eating, typically you're not going to be eating bars and bananas and whole foods at race pace. Like, we just wouldn't recommend that. If you're looking to perform at your absolute best, then the products that you're going to be consuming are going to be easier products to digest and get down, i.e. bars and blocks with plus or minus some carbohydrate liquid, in order to get that total amount of carbohydrate up around that 90, 100, 120 grams an hour on the bike. So that's where the choice of product becomes very important in the session that is designed by your coach to mimic whatever a race pace. Does that make sense? That
It does. It does.
you need to start to practice using gels and blocks and potentially a bar at 60 minutes on 60 minutes, if that is what you're going to choose. For a 70.3, if you can manage just blocks and gels, maybe with a little bit of liquid carbohydrate to top up, and that's all you need to get into that higher amount of carbohydrates, that's what you need to practice. If it's an Ironman, okay, that's where a bar every 60 minutes on the 60 could be beneficial just from a pure caloric intake. But because you're only taking that bar in, or half bar every 60 minutes, it's also more manageable on the gut because you're not going to have to take down as much. So that's what you need to practice. And then on top of that, practicing your fluid consumption in line with whatever your sweat rate is. And that comes back to the very start of this conversation, where understanding what your sweat rate is becomes very important to understand, okay, I do need to drink a bottle of liquid every hour to maintain 2% body weight loss by the end of the race. And that's acceptable. But if you're not getting that in and you're filling up on products that aren't necessarily suited to allow you to get total calories in, I would suggest changing out those products and then moving to products that actually you can practice with and get more in.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And the other tip I picked from today was just to break it into halves or thirds during the hour, instead of just feeling like I have to finish it all at once. That could also probably help with that.
And that's the other thing. Like, if we're saying eat every 20 minutes, it's not like on the 20-minute mark or 50, like for a male, if it's 15 minutes, it's not like on that 15-minute mark, it's a race to get the entire, like for a gel, it will go down in 2 seconds. Fine.
Yeah.
But if it's a bar, you've still got 15 or 20 minutes or 25 minutes to consume that bar until your next feed. So if you need to break it down into 3 chunks over 20 minutes, it's manageable. Don't feel like you've got to shove the whole thing in your mouth and get it down in 2 seconds. Like your body is breaking it down. It's got to go down the hatch. It's got to go into the gut. It's got to be broken down in the gut. It's got to then move through the gut into the small intestine. Like, there's a lot of time going on. It's not like everything's instantaneous. So, I mean, obviously with products like gels and that, it is going to be a faster transition, but just keep that in mind, that you don't have to try and consume everything in 2 seconds.
Thank you. I'm excited to give it a try.
Cool. I just saw Pam's question about altitude, top of hydration, electrolytes, any other considerations. What did I read this the other day, actually. We talked about it the other day. At altitude, I think your sweat rate, because you're higher and it could be cooler, there's the perception that you're not actually sweating as much, but actually your sweat rate can actually accelerate in altitude. So again, it's sort of, I would say, weigh yourself before and after sessions at altitude and get an understanding of, does your sweat rate change at altitude? And if it does, then you just need to manage that appropriately as well. That's all it comes down to. Look, a lot of this is, I think you can give guidelines on what theoretically is going to happen, but until you actually do it and understand how it affects you individually, then, it's all theoretical, I guess. Kathleen, any questions? I know you've been trucking away with all your stuff and doing really well.
Well, maybe more of a confession. So I'm still struggling a little bit with the high carb feeds during long rides, because 65% of my FTP is solidly in zone 2. So if I'm doing I guess I'm just still kind of confused about what should I be eating then.
Where are you going to be racing at?
Wisconsin. So
No,
Hill.
but what pace? Like, are you
Oh.
you're talking about being at that 65%?
Well, I'll probably shoot for, let me see what it is. Like 75, 76% of my FTP will be my race pace.
And I mean, I imagine
That's still in zone 2.
It depends on where that's marrying up to your heart rate and percentage of VO2. But I would imagine if you're working at 75%, your heart rate's going to be starting to push up, which should be.
Okay. Well, and I've been looking at watts when
Wattage.
At wattage for the zones. So maybe I need to look at heart rate.
Well, your heart rate and wattage should marry up as well. So, if you're pushing out a percentage of watts based on percentage of FTP, it should marry up to your percentage of VO2 and your heart rate. There should be fairly close correlation between all of those markers, those physiological markers. And if you're at that 75% and maintaining that 75% of your FTP, then you will be working at a high percentage, which ultimately theoretically would be requiring you to utilize carbohydrates as a primary fuel source.
Okay.
So I guess what it might come down to is what zone are you actually in zone 2, or I don't know, it'd be a case of checking out your zones and making sure your zones are accurate. Because I think Elliot and I think it was Elliot, we pointed out, and we were talking about this in terms of even wattage and the mechanical efficiency of wattage and whatnot on the bike, and how that translates to calories and whatnot. So.
Okay. And I had VO2 testing done years ago. I don't know how long, if that data is valid.
Years ago won't be valid. It will only be valid in the last period of time. It's always good to get it done and compare to what you were a few years ago. I mean, where is your heart rate? Like in relation, okay, you're comparing watts, but what is your heart rate sitting at?
I haven't been, I wear a heart rate monitor, so I have the data, but I haven't been.
Do you look at it? Like, have you ever looked and seen what your heart rate is at the time you're sort of working in this 75%?
I haven't, so I will.
I think it would certainly be of interest because, if you're, what's your max heart rate? Do you know?
Well, on the run, it's like 175. On the bike, it's lower, and I'd have to look it up. I do have it recorded.
So, even 175, if you talk about 65% of that or 70% of that, it's pretty low. Like your sort of heart rate's about 135, maybe 140. So I would guesstimate you're probably well into, between 120 and 140 is going to be still in that above 65, 70% of max capacity. So.
Yeah, because I know, 131 is the top of my zone 2 heart rate on the bike.
Yeah. And you'd be working above that, I'd imagine, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
In a race.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been filling out my carb tests wrong. So.
Yeah. But that's where I think it's like understanding like what zone are you working at and if it is a race pace, and this comes back to Matt's questions, like, if it's at race pace and you're working at that percentage above, 65, 70% of your max capacity, then theoretically, and yes, there is going to be individual variation in terms of your ability to utilize fat or carbohydrates as a primary fuel source. And that I talked about this in that podcast I just did with John Thorman from Flow Faster. There is that crossover point, and the goal for everyone when we talk about fat adaptation or maximal fat oxidation is shifting that curve to the right, so that crossover point occurs later as intensity increases, i.e. wattage goes up, heart rate goes up, your percentage of VO2. We want that to shift to the right, and everyone is going to have individual variation based on how metabolically adapted they are. But you as an athlete have to get used to using and practicing using those higher amounts of carbohydrates, and that only comes with practice. And back to Iris's point, like, it's training the gut to cope with that, and just from a physiological standpoint, it changes you in like I talked about in there, like the transporters inside the small intestine, the ability for the stomach to improve gastric emptying, the perception from the brain, the oxidation rates. Like there's so much going on, but from a practical standpoint, you just need to get used to eating more.
Yeah.
And consuming more at more regular intervals. That's probably, without going into the science, it's just your ability to consume high amounts of carbohydrates. And that's, if you talk to Danielle, if you talk to Elliot, the only way they got better at getting up to 120 grams was by practicing. It wasn't comfortable. Like, and there's always that, like, I can't do this, but then it's like, oh, maybe I can do this. And then practicing more and more. And then over time, it's like, oh, I can do 90 grams an hour. Oh, I can do 100 grams. Oh, I can do 120. I mean, Elliot got to 150 grams an hour and I was like, it's too high. Like it doesn't serve a purpose at that point. Like, I think then you're actually just oversaturating everything and we don't actually know what happens beyond 120 grams. And it didn't make him feel good either. He actually felt worse in terms of recovery afterwards. And I think it was just probably blood sugar levels were just too high. And then you have the potential, inside, potentially due to all those processed carbohydrates, a heap of inflammation potentially going on as a result of that was counterproductive to actually recovery, as opposed to if you talk to some of the athletes, like, Danielle's did an Ironman 2 weeks ago and she's doing an Olympic this weekend. Her recovery has been fantastic. And I put that down to her increased ability to consume high amounts of carbohydrates along with the increased protein amounts and day-to-day nutrition being on point to allow recovery and not restricting total energy intake in that sense, whether it be in session or out of session.
That's really helpful. I am a believer in the high carb. When I fueled my longer rides, I'm up to about 75 grams per hour now. I feel fantastic.
Yeah. And keep pushing that, Kath, is what I would say. Is like 75 is certainly not your upper limit. Now, again, if we go back to what we were talking about, that gut training last week, how fast you are is going to be a determinant on how much carbohydrates you need. If you're sitting in a race in Z1, Z2, and that is as fast as you want to go, and you're happy to keep your heart rate at 120 to 130 beats, your total amount of carbohydrate requirement is going to be lower because you're not pushing the body to actually absorb and utilize high amounts of carbohydrate. If you then go, no, actually, I want to race at 145 to 160. I'm not saying you're going to maintain that for an Ironman or whatever, but some people do. Plenty of people do actually. Then it becomes, okay, well, how much fuel can I get into my body to actually sustain that effort? And that sustainment of effort, that sustained effort is only going to come from your ability to take on exogenous carbohydrates and also then tap into your endogenous stores of fuel, i.e. carbohydrates, glycogen, and potentially fat. So, cool.
All right.
It sounds very technical, but the reality is, guys, I'm not joking. Like, if you can follow the colors in the app based around like the total amount of carbs that you require on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and then for those specific sessions when we're saying go for it with the carbs and don't be afraid of carbs, and then gradually increase those amount of carbs in those specific sessions, you will nail it. Like, I can't tell you how many athletes have systematically improved their ability to tolerate carbohydrates and consume carbs just by following the plan. And as a result, race performance is, significantly improved.
All right, I'm going to quick get Iris's question.
Oh, yeah.
You were on 250 calories an hour, the equivalent of carbs. So I think you're asking that's about 62 grams of carbohydrates versus we're looking at, trying to get you to 90 grams. So closer to 360 calories or so.
Gotcha.
Had you hit that 250 calorie mark?
Classic. I have no idea.
I'm here because I need help. I'm bonking on all the big sessions in biking and running because I'm unable to keep up. That's my problem. And I did a full Ironman, and that's what ruined my my run, because I just couldn't. At some point, I had no idea what was going on anymore. Like, I didn't remember what I need to take when, and it was a lot. So I need to train.
Okay. Well, good. You're in the right place.
Iris, can I ask in ballpark, how much do you weigh? I know that's a very personal question, but
no,
like,
I don't
in
mind.
ballpark.
135.
Okay.
I am not fast.
Okay, so
I am not a Kona age group, placer. That's not my goal at all. But I also don't want to fall off the bike because I'm unable to keep up.
So if you look at that, you're taking in around 1 gram per kilo body weight. So we know that with glucose alone, you can probably oxidize 1.1 to 1.2 grams of glucose. If we then take in another type of carbohydrate, i.e. these, like fructose, you can potentially push that up to 1.7, 1.8 grams per hour, which again, 60 grams, which I doubt you were hitting just by the sounds of you saying, I have no idea if I hit 250 calories. The reality is you were probably like a lot of women who've been on this program. They take in around 30 to 32 grams per hour average out. So you're at the 50% of the minimum that you should be taking in. And I would say you're probably 25% of what we'd be aiming for to get you to take in. I think your goal should be around 90 grams an hour based on your body weight and potentially your ability to do it. So that's where I think you've got to get to. I think getting to 60 grams an hour is going to be your first challenge. I think, and you just understanding what 60 grams an hour is. And I think it's the same with Maddie. Like, it's understanding what that 60 grams an hour looks like, then understanding what 70 grams, 80 grams, 90 grams, once you're in that, and understanding, okay, how often do I need to eat and what products do I need to eat to get to that 60 grams an hour? Okay, now I can do that. If we talk about 60 grams an hour, it's 2 precision hydration gels an hour, 1 at 30, 1 at 60. That's pretty easy. Obviously you've got to manage your electrolytes around that because the pH gels don't have any sodium in it, but that's, to Pam's point, maybe using the pH electrolytes in her water bottles. And then it's, okay, could you use the pH sachet, which has 17 grams of carbs in it, plus the appropriate amount of electrolytes? You have 2 gels plus 1 of that. Okay, you're at 77 grams an hour already, just through 2 feeds and sipping your water bottle.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
Absolutely. It just makes sense why you bonk after 3 hours, because if every hour you're 50%, then it all adds up.
And then you say, okay, well, instead of every 30 minutes, I'm going to have a pH gel, I'm going to have one every 20 minutes. That's now 90 grams an hour, plus the pH sachet, 17 grams, you're at 107 grams an hour without even thinking about it.
Okay.
And now I'm just talking about that, using that. If you didn't want to use pH gels, you use something like the Endurance Tap, which again, if you like maple syrup, I think they're the best tasting gel. I'm a bit biased, but it's very liquid as well. The viscosity is very low. So you can put that in a bottle and drink those gels. Again, it has some sodium in there. You then manage that appropriately. In one bottle, you can fit 25 Endurance Tap, I think. That's enough to get you around an entire Ironman course, and then just managing your electrolytes and water on the bike by grabbing on bottle courses and dumping a tablet in or a sachet in. It's all possible. So it's just that practical element of it, but then just being consistent with being consistent and like repetition. That. It's just repetition. That's all it is.
I like that.
So pick your products. I mean, as I said, Elizabeth and myself and Jonathan will recommend certain products. The only reason we're recommending those products is because they work. Like, I'm not bound to any company to say, like, we're not going to recommend a company that we don't believe in, put it that way. Mm-hmm. I know you will probably see a lot of that on unfortunately on social media and that, where people are recommending products that they don't even use or they don't believe in, but we're not going to recommend a product that we don't believe in. Okay. And if something changes in that product where we don't believe in it anymore, we won't recommend it. You know,
Thank you.
The number one priority of the program is, you know, the athlete's health and not doing any harm. And then once you're a healthy athlete, you're going to be a high performing athlete.
Yeah. I really like this about this program because when you do the Ironman training, there's so much precision in heart rate, in pace, and then it's like, and eat 250 calories of what, how soon, how, like, I don't know. So I like the precision on what to eat, when to drink. I can follow that. And that's what happened to me in the Ironman. I was on the run and I just didn't know what was my name anymore. I didn't know what was I eating, when. I'm going to write it on my hand here and I'm going to follow it.
Yeah. I mean, look, people, you know, stick it on their bike, on their crossbar on their bike. You know, there is different ways to do that. Hopefully it's just, you know, the easiest way I think is just set a timer on your watch that goes either every 15 or every 20 or every 25 minutes. And it just literally, I mean, on my Garmin, it just comes up with eat. You know, maybe you put eat Iris so you remember your name.
I'll do that.
Anyway,
my husband said when
okay.
I explained to him about the program, he said, I don't understand this program. I have no problem eating.
Exactly. Cool. Okay. Any other questions from anyone? Maddie, you're good with everything at the moment? I know you're, and I love, mate, I love that you're leaning in hard and asking questions. It's great. So don't be shy with it. I think it's great. And the more you ask, the more you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, I'm good. I got a quick question. I'm assuming it's not a problem to do like an entire Ironman bike on cliff blocks.
If you can. I think the reality is, mate, you're not going to cope because you'll just get so sick of them. And this is where I think mixing up some products just to change the texture and the taste profile is important. Like it just becomes very monotonous, especially for an Ironman where it's, you know, what's your duration? How long are we talking?
Probably 5.5 to 6.
For the half Ironman?
No, for a full, sorry. So for the half will be about 3 hours on the bike.
Oh, sorry, on the bike. I thought you were saying total time. I was like, that's impressive. Yeah, look, I mean, if you can manage it on the bike for that period of time, go for it. But I just think, you know, breaking it up with some, you know, certainly for an Ironman, I think having an option of some type of bar, just again from a total caloric standpoint, but also to break up that monotony of that glucose consistency in the mouth, I think makes sense. I think, again, using blocks and gels, it gives you something to do as well. I've had a lot of feedback from athletes. It gives them something to think about and focus on as much as everything else, because you got a lot of time to think. So yeah, but yeah, if you're going to do that strategy of just, and the other thing is total room. I don't know if you have enough room in your bento box and storage for cliff blocks. That's where gels in a bottle can be far more advantageous in terms of aero position and ability to get them down and just manage it. So we were actually talking about, we're going to do, probably in a couple of weeks, we'll do a discussion about practicalities of eating and what certain athletes do, how they set up their bike and how they tackle the run and how they approach it. So I'm just going to ask some of the athletes that we've worked with what their actual setup is in terms of their hydration, their carbohydrates, and how they manage that with what systems they use, just so you can all get an idea around different bike setups and different run setups, because I think it is important, and what products they tend to use. It's always nice to hear what other athletes are doing. And yeah, the reason we started drinking the gels was only because one athlete made me aware of it, the ability to do it, and then we started practicing with it, and it just worked really well. So, yeah.
Is there a certain ratio you need for the gel to water, or it doesn't matter?
It's just whatever works. Whatever. Yeah, with the endurance tap, you don't need to add any water. It just comes out. With the pH gels, it tends to be a little bit more water. Maurten, you can't do it with Maurten. The water messes the hydrogel up. So it's important you can't do that with any of the hydrogels. The Coda gels takes a little bit more water because they're thicker. The Power Bar gels take a little bit of water by feedback from some of the other athletes. So it just comes down to personal preference, what you can get it through. And then also using like a clear bottle. All the bottles tend to be black these days on the bike for some reason. I think it's just aesthetics, but it actually is really annoying because then you can't see actually how much you're actually consuming. Sure. So it's little considerations like that that, you know, on race day become very important. Right. Danny, you'll be one of those ones I will be asking for your setup and how you do it all, because I think that's really good.
Yeah, it's been working really well, so I'm happy to share.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining. I know we went a little bit long, so appreciate those that stuck on. 3 reminders. 1, there's a survey at the very end when you close out of Zoom. If you can just answer those 2 quick questions. Secondary, I'll stay on if there's anyone who has any issues with the app or just want to, you know, finish setting up Iris. So if there's anything, feel free to stay on. And third, if you wouldn't mind, if you haven't yet, please leave us a review on the App Store. We're trying to get ourselves out there to be found by more athletes. So if you haven't yet, we would really appreciate that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, thanks everyone. Enjoy your day or evening. It's only morning here, so yeah, enjoy your sleep.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
nice
you.
to see you.
See you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.